Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's 7 o'clock in New York, 6 o'clock in Chicago, 4 o'clock in Los Angeles. Let's begin. In his first term from 2017 to 2021, President Trump strengthened the U.S.-Israel relationship in very significant ways, from recognizing Israeli sovereignty in the Golan to finally refusing to invoke the waiver that allowed every president since Bill Clinton to defer movement of the embassy to Jerusalem. America's embassy opened there in Jerusalem on May 14th, 2018. But even more than this, President Trump's first-term administration deployed American pressure to restrain Iran, the single greatest source of danger to Israel, the single greatest source of disruption in the Middle East, an adversary to the United States, and an ally of Russia, North Korea, and China. And of course, there is the historic growth of Arab and Muslim nations that normalized relations with Israel under the rubric of the Abraham Accords. Jewish and Zionist history will look back on President Trump's first term with great favor, thanks in part to our guests this evening. Now, our task tonight is to try and understand the prospects for the U.S.-Israel relationship in President Trump's second term. His first major act took place even before he was inaugurated yesterday. It was his special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, who brokered the ceasefire deal that has temporarily paused hostilities between Israel and Hamas and has already delivered 3 Israeli hostages back to their families. How should we understand this deal, and what should we expect over the coming weeks and months at the dawn of President Trump's second administration? My name is Jonathan Silver. I'm the editor of Mosaic and the Warren R. Stern Senior Fellow at Tikvah. I'm pleased to welcome you to our briefing this evening, and I want to especially welcome the members of the Tikvah Society, whose investment in our work makes evenings like this possible. Our guests first are our chairman, Senior Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, veteran of the Reagan and George W. Bush administrations, and he was most recently Secretary Pompeo's Special Representative for Iran, Elliott Abrams. Second, David Friedman, the U.S. Ambassador to Israel during President Trump's first term, one of the architects of the Abraham Accords, and the author of 2 books, a memoir of his time as ambassador, Sledgehammer, and a more prospective new book that proposes a plan to resolve Israel's conflict with her Palestinian neighbors, One Jewish State. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
We're going to have a conversation for about 40 minutes and then invite questions from our Zoom audience. If you'd like to ask a question, please just type it into the Q&A function in the bottom of your Zoom screen. Elliot, I'd like to just start with you and ask for you to describe, just so that we sort of set the table here, what was this deal? What are the terms? What did it aspire to accomplish? Tell us about it.
Okay, what are the terms? The terms are that there are 3 phases. We're in phase 1 now. It's supposed to last 6 weeks, 42 days. During it, 33 Israeli hostages are supposed to be released. By the end of this 6 weeks, all women and children and men over 50 are to have been released. 30 Palestinians will be released per Israeli civilian hostage, and 50 Palestinians will be released from prison for each female IDF soldier. During the 6 weeks, there's supposed to be a ceasefire, and the IDF is pulling back, in essence, to buffer zones along the edges of Gaza. Second phase has not been really negotiated yet. Negotiations are supposed to begin on day 16 of phase 1. Phase 2 is supposed to last for 6 weeks, 42 days. At the end of it, there was supposed to be a permanent end to this conflict. All of the IDF soldiers are supposed to be out of Gaza. All male hostages will be released in exchange for a number of Palestinian convicted prisoners, but the number has not yet been negotiated. Phase 3 is supposed to bring, at the end of the war, a comprehensive agreement, 3 or 5 year agreement for the political and security future of Gaza, an exchange of bodies if Hamas is holding any more hostage bodies, and a reopening of border crossings. As I think most people listening will understand, there's a lot of things not in that agreement. What we do not know today, for example, we don't know if it's going to work. We don't know if we'll get to phase two. We don't know what that future of Gaza, who will govern Gaza, who will provide security, law and order in Gaza, who will prevent Hamas from rebuilding, who will guard the borders of Gaza, what combination of the IDF, Egyptians, other forces from Arab countries or elsewhere, all of this remains today uncertain.
Ambassador Friedman, it's sometimes said in the media that this bears a remarkable similarity to President Biden's proposals for a ceasefire agreement structure. Is it?
Yeah, I think it is. I think that it looks a lot like the deal in May. Of course, the difference is that Biden couldn't get it over the finish line, and Trump. I think it's clear that Trump's influence was what did get it over the finish line. So that's the and to a certain extent, I mean, that's one of the excuses. One of the I should start off by saying I hate the deal. I absolutely hate the deal. At the same time, I should say that I'm not opposed to the deal, which sounds ridiculous, right? I mean, and it is ridiculous because this is such a crazy world that we're living in. I hate the deal because to just this a couple of days ago, in order to get 3 victims of terror out of bondage, Israel had to release 90 terrorists. I mean, to get 3 innocent. I mean, we're not talking about war, soldiers versus soldiers. We're talking about victims versus terrorists. To get 3 victims out, we had to give up 9. So it's asymmetric. It makes no sense in terms of from a traditional kind of deal perspective. It makes no sense. The reason I respect it and I don't oppose it is because the Prime Minister supports it, the Shabak supports it, the IDF supports it, and the people of Israel support it because the people of Israel are one big family and they are in such dire pain from this hostage situation. It is worth it to them, and I'm certainly not going to second guess not being in the room. Now, the deal itself, you can only, when you play poker, you can't choose your own cards, right? So I mean, the timing here that Trump was given or Witkoff was given was a deal that Israel had already agreed to, right? And the window was like 2 or 3 days or 4 days. I mean, the idea here was that there was something in the air, kind of along the lines of Reagan and Carter and the Iranian hostages. There was something in the air that everybody thought there was this, unique window open for a couple of days. Trump, contributed to that by threatening and saying they'll be held to pay, and it just seemed like something could happen here. So Witkoff comes in, he's given a few days. The deal is almost entirely baked. Israel's already agreed to it. You're not gonna. That's the hand you're dealt. You're not going to really have much to do to change it. The difference is what's interesting. You ask the question, well, then why did Hamas agree this time and not the first time, right? Because if it's the same deal. And I think what you have here are 2 fundamentally different bets on Trump by both sides. Hamas, in May, when Biden was sponsoring this deal, they said, look, we're never going to get to phase 2 because Biden's got to win an election. There's no way he's going to pressure Israel to leave us, in control of the Gaza Strip. Now Hamas is looking at Trump and saying, you know what, he's talking a lot about peace. Maybe he really will pressure Israel. I think it's a huge mistaken bet, but I don't really care that much because to me, this is a phase 1 deal. That's all it is. It's a deal for hostages. It's not a peace deal. To me, there is pretty close to 0 chance that Israel and Hamas are going to agree to anything that triggers phase 2, because essentially Hamas is going to want to stay in control of the Gaza Strip, and Israel can't agree to that. And if you heard Trump yesterday, they asked him, how confident are you that this is going to hold? He said, I'm not confident at all. So with all the hair on this deal, at the end of the day, it's a expensive means to free a finite number of hostages. Unfortunately, I don't think this will result in freeing all of them, but it'll free some of them. And then I think Israel's received assurances that it can go back into Gaza and fight the war and rid the area of Hamas, how long it takes. And I think that's the direction we're going. I think Trump will be okay with that.
Okay, but you said that there's 2 fundamentally different bets being waged.
Yeah, Bibi's bet is that Trump's not going to put handcuffs on him or stop him from going back to Gaza. Bibi says, look, they want to stay in control. I can't agree to that. The people of Israel won't agree to that. And you yourself, Mr. President, have said that Gaza can never again be a safe haven for terrorists. So I'm left with no choice but to kind of stop here. And then I appreciate everything you've done. We've certainly saved some human lives. And Trump, has met so many of these hostage families. He's actually got a very strong personal interest in seeing as many people freed. But Bibi will say, look, I went as far as I could. Thank you. I couldn't have done it without you. But unfortunately, as you and I agree, we can't leave Hamas in charge.
Elliot, how do you morally, strategically, security-wise, how do you evaluate the deal?
Oh, I'm essentially where Ambassador Friedman is. It's a terrible deal, but Israel has to do it, I think. Has to do it because they have not been able, through 15 months of war, to free very many hostages, very small number. And while they have the ability to go back into Gaza in a year or 2 or 3, it's not clear how many hostages would be alive at that point. So I certainly agree that this is not our decision to make. It's a decision for the people of Israel to make, and the government of Israel, and they've made it. I think where there's no agreement at all is the future of Gaza. I mean, there are dreams about the future of Gaza, but we're seeing already Hamas trying to assert itself. Who's going to push back against that? Who's going to prevent that? It would be nice to believe that some kind of international force will go in there. It's not realistic to me to think that that will happen, because what you're asking is, you're willing to shoot to kill. It's just like the West Bank. That's the question. If you're going to send in, peacekeepers from someplace who are not willing to do that, you're going to create a situation like Israel had in Lebanon with UNIFIL. There are peacekeepers who don't keep the peace. So I'm pessimistic about the ultimate outcome here. My only hope would be that, we get as many hostages out there, supposed to be 33 in the beginning. Maybe we can get more after that, as many as possible before this stops or collapses, as it is most likely to do.
Ambassador Friedman, the former Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, and the Biden administration in general had always envisioned what they had referred to as a rejuvenated or rehabilitated Palestinian Authority having a role in the government of Gaza afterwards. I assume that you believe that that's not a very likely scenario. So I suppose my question is, what do you think is the most likely alternative?
Well, I sure hope it's not a scenario. You shouldn't get, if the bar to ruling Gaza is that you're not as bad as Hamas, that's a pretty low bar. And I hope that's not the way people look. I mean, there are certainly, the PA is looking at it that way. They've already asserted their legal rights, whatever that means, to rule Gaza. They're the only ones right now, other than Israel, willing to jump in. So I guess they think that's an opportunity. But look, to me, I don't see any material difference between the PA and Hamas, and I don't think Israel does either. You haven't heard the PA condemn Hamas. 80% of the Palestinians in Judea and Samaria supported October 7th. There's if there was an election tomorrow in Judea and Samaria, Hamas would probably win. I mean, PA is both, malign and unpopular, and if you can, oddly enough, because they're so corrupt, because they don't distribute wealth fairly to their people. So I don't think they're eligible. My view is I don't think I don't know who's going to invest money in Gaza at this point without excuse me, without seeing. Without knowing the end game. I mean, it's billions of dollars. Who's going to put billions of dollars to build something that's only going to result? It's going to continue to be in a war zone. So, to me, like the optimistic, scenario, and I've heard this from various government sources, is, you send, a million go off to Indonesia, a couple 100,000 go to Egypt, maybe a couple 100,000 go to Turkey, and now you've got the ability to rebuild something and not fight a war at the same time. I don't know if that's a pipe dream or not. I don't know what that costs. I don't know what it looks like. I mean, these are things that are bantered around, but because Hamas will remain in power for some period of time until Israel completes the war, and it's not overnight. I mean, people say, "Well, it's been 15 months. Why haven't you?" It hasn't. I mean, there's still, and as I think Blinken said correctly, it's like whack-a-mole. I mean, you kill a few and they recruit a few more, and it constantly rebuilds. So it's going to take a while, and the easiest way would be to get them to leave. There's no question about it, but that requires a lot of cooperation from a lot of countries. I think Trump could do it. I think Trump could do it, because he's just more out of the box and more transactional than Biden is. But I think I can't think of any other short-term fix for Gaza other than a large population transfer.
I certainly the Egyptians, in my experience, would be totally resistant to that. They are resistant to accepting 3 Palestinians, much less
Right.
300,000. And I just, on the Palestinian Authority, I would say that the United States has really never, I would argue, except for several years under George W. Bush, really pushed for reform. You look at the last 4 years, there was a big hullabaloo about reform and the change in prime minister. And this was really a case where one thief replaced another thief. And that was called reform. It's going to take an enormous amount of pressure to create real reform. I mean, there are ways to do it. There's somebody sitting there in the United States actually now, Salam Fayyad, who was a reformist, finance minister and prime minister. Could he be in charge of Gaza and rebuild? Yes, he could. But that would require the kind of leadership that we didn't get in the Biden administration to convene the Egyptians and Jordanians and Saudis and Emiratis and force change on the Palestinian Authority, because they're not going to do it unless they're forced.
Yeah, if I can jump into that, I have always operated under the assumption, I think an informed assumption, that the Palestinians, if you speak to them candidly, have 2 issues that they're wrestling with. One is the issue of pride. I mean, somehow there is some level of a desire to be autonomous, and then there's the practical questions of how are we going to build a state or a society with roads and highways and trade and a transparent economy and freedom of religion and freedom and a justice system that works and freedom of contract. And I mean, how are we going to do all that? Because if you don't do that, it's a waste of time anyway. We're going to just be where we are now. And I've had a chance, I had a chance when I was ambassador to have some of those candid meetings. And that was really what drove me to write my second book, which is, and my conclusion was this: at the end of the day, the Palestinians are never going to get up and say, we agree to live under Israeli rule. Please come take us over. They're not going to say that. At the same time, they're also not going to fight too hard. If Israel were to extend its sovereignty over Judea and Samaria, Gaza right now, and I think it's too soon to talk about that because it's such a raw wound, but just using a template of Judea and Samaria, I don't believe that it would be all that badly received, because at the end of the day, everybody who lives in Judea and Samaria has a relative who lives inside the Green Line, and they know that living inside the Green Line under Israeli sovereignty is actually a pretty damn good way to live. I mean, 20% of the Israeli population is Arab. More than 20% of the elite university students are Arab. I have a dear friend who's a Muslim who used to be the chairman of Bank Leumi, the largest bank in Israel. It's not bad being a Muslim in Israel, being an Israeli citizen. So the question is, can Israel do that? It's a huge lift. Can we convince the Gulf that that's really the right outcome? And if that becomes the right outcome, then you have the ability to kind of test that. And if it works, and I think it would, then that becomes sort of the template for whoever is left in Gaza when it's time to reach some kind of a final decision. But I don't think we'll be at that point for a few more years anyway.
Here you and I have disagreement, because I don't want 4 or 5 million Arabs to be part of Israel. It changes the whole nature of the Israeli state and society. In my view, there ought to be some kind of autonomy and self-rule for Palestinians, but not statehood. And if there is an entity that has a certain degree of autonomy, it needs to be linked to a real state. It's either Jordan or Egypt. Excuse me, it's either Jordan or Israel. One of which is, Jewish, Hebrew speaking. The other of which is Arabic speaking, and half Palestinian. So to me, the logic is a Palestinian entity in a kind of confederation with Jordan, not with Israel. You and I can argue this out.
Well, look, I think, I would just say that when you say we don't want to own, the West Bank, or we own it already. Like, we just don't, like, we may not have recognized it, but we own it because we're sending our troops into Jenin every night, into Ramallah every night. They're risking their lives, daily to try to keep the peace. Now, if it wasn't ours, why would we care, right? I mean, it's ours. It's just that it's only ours from a security perspective. It's not ours in a full sense. And I think that the sooner we kind of, we have no tools to de-radicalize the Palestinians, because we're only there with guns and tanks. And if we were there with something else, guns and tanks, of course, continue that and kill all the terrorists, but at the same time, showing up with tractors and infrastructure and roads and a hospital and a better school, I think that we would actually, and if we convince the Saudis and the Emiratis to fund a lot of that, I think we have better tools to de-radicalize this population, which is the only long-term prospect, to turn them into the equivalent of Israeli citizens, regardless of how they vote and those types of issues.
Actually,
I'd like
Ambassador Friedman,
I was just going to say, I'd like to turn them into Jordanian citizens, but anyway, he continued.
So, but I wonder if, despite the fact that it is so recent and raw, the logic of your thinking doesn't actually make at least as much sense in Gaza. And here for security reasons, because any other solution would ask an Israeli elected leader to say to his citizens, I am going to entrust your security to this other force, to an international force, to a UN force, whatever. And Israeli citizens can't possibly accept those terms, just as they have learned that lesson so horribly in the North.
Well, no, they can't accept those terms, but there's two differences to me between Gaza and Judea and Samaria. One, of course, is the condition of the two places. I mean, one is a parking lot, and one is a place where people are living, can continue to live. And then the second thing is that Judea and Samaria just is biblical Israel, and it's so important to Israel's biblical DNA. I think trying to be responsible for Gaza and not Judea and Samaria just means that it's hard. I mean, Gaza is harder, and doing that without having the ability, you can only really demonstrate a kind of the things I'd like to demonstrate in Judea and Samaria, because those are places where there is business, there is commerce, there are factories, there are, so. But you're right. Like, you're right. Ultimately, I guess we're saying the same thing, which is we can't envision any place, any security force other than Israel, having responsibility to keep October 7th from happening again. And I agree with that.
Okay, let's turn next to the incoming administration, to the new administration. As I said in the beginning, the record of the first Trump administration with regard to the U.S.-Israel relationship is perhaps unparalleled in the history of the United States. Some of the key players that made that so, Ambassador Friedman, no one less than yourself, it also included people like Jason Greenblatt, Jared Kushner, Secretary Pompeo. Those are all people that are not part of this administration. So why don't you just introduce us, if you can, to the dramatis personae of this team and explain who they are?
Well, look, some of them I'm sure are known to the audience. I mean, Marco Rubio just got confirmed today, is one of the most articulate, one of the strongest, and one of the most brilliant, frankly, senators and I think future diplomats one could find. I mean, he's just a class act in all ways, and I've known him for probably on 10 years now. I think he's brilliant, and I think he's, again, on the issues we're discussing tonight, who could be in charge of Gaza, he is very much out front of the view Hamas can never go back, and I don't think he thinks the PA can go back. Mike Waltz is, I put him in the same category. Mike Waltz comes at it probably from a slightly more faith-based position as a member of Congress, who is part of that group, part of kind of the Mike Johnson, Jim Jordan kind of group of people who also see Israel as a place that animates their faith. But I think Mike is in the same position.
That's the new national security advisor.
Yeah, and that's, and just to be clear, that may be in some respects the most important position because it's down the hall from the Oval Office. For people that don't know how the West Wing works, I mean, there's the Oval Office, and then down the hall there's a national security advisor, and he's just as close as the vice president, and he can walk in whenever he wants. And so if there's things going on and the president needs a quick read on something, he'll go to Mike Waltz. Now Pete Hegseth is really fits into the same camp. Pete and I know each other very well. I've done a show many times. I helped him do when I was ambassador, I helped get him a lot of access to Judea and Samaria and to the prime minister, because he did a piece on biblical Israel. I think you heard him say at his confirmation hearing that he believes that every single Hamas terrorist should be destroyed and eradicated. This is the incoming government at the official level, right? I mean, and of course, Mike Huckabee, the guy who's taking over for me, Mike and I and our wives are dear friends. We've vacationed together the last 3 summers. I mean, I recommended him, as did others, for this job. I think that, his on the issues that I care about, in particular, making sure that we never confront the reality of a Palestinian state. I know Elliott doesn't want a Palestinian state either. So I think we're all on the same page there.
All on the same page.
All on the same page. But Mike has been to Israel many times, sees it that way, and also sees it as well from a perspective of faith. I don't know if you had a chance to hear Elise Stefanik today during her confirmation hearing. She was asked, do you believe that God gave Judea and Samaria to the Jewish people alone? And she said yes, which made Chris Van Hollen, almost have a heart attack. So, look, that's the incoming, foreign policy group that's relevant to Israel. They are, frankly, I mean, if you go back in time to Rex Tillerson, James Mattis, H.R. McMaster, Nikki Haley, and me, that would be the same 5. You can make a case that Nikki Haley is as good as Elise Stefanik. I think I would go with Elise Stefanik. You can make a case that Mike Huckabee is better than me, although I would probably argue with that. The other 3 for sure were better off this time. Hegseth versus Mattis, Rubio versus Tillerson, Waltz versus McMaster. It's not even close. Now, those guys all lost their jobs eventually and were replaced with I think, better choices. But of course, Elliott Abrams came in, which was a huge plus for the administration. But I think where we are, relative to where we started 8 years ago, just enormously better off.
On the other hand, as you said, there's Steve Witkoff, who has had an enormous role in brokering this deal. He's someone that I actually don't know that much about.
So let me jump in on that, because let me jump in just quickly on Witkoff. Look, I wasn't in the room when Witkoff spoke with Netanyahu. He's gotten a lot of press that he somehow badgered Netanyahu into going along with the deal. Number one, nobody's going to badger Bibi into doing what he doesn't want to do. That's sort of number one. Number two, I'm sure that if he did badger Netanyahu badgered him right back and got a bunch of things that we don't know about, but that are of significant importance to the state of Israel. And the third thing about Witkoff, look, as we said at the beginning, he's dealing with the May deal. I mean, there wasn't time to do anything other than just get Hamas to agree to the May deal. And I'll tell you, look, I don't know him well. I know that he's been to Israel many times. I think he's a black belt in Krav Maga, and he trains in Israel. So he loves Israel, and he's also going to do what the president asked him to do. And I think his mandate was to get hostages out, and I think he fulfilled it. But when you're talking about people to be nervous about, I definitely would not include Witkoff in that group. Now there may be others, but I don't think Witkoff's one of them.
Yeah, it's a way for me to try to understand President Trump's, like all successful political coalitions, President Trump's coalitions also includes a lot of different factors. Some are very pro-Israel for reasons related to their faith. Some are pro-Israel for reasons related to their understanding of American national interest. There are 100 reasons. And there are people who
Sure.
are more critical of Israel in President Trump's coalition. And the question is what kind of pressure they're going to exert on this new team and on the president himself.
Listen, obviously the elephant in the room is Tucker Carlson. Everybody's afraid of him. I'm certainly no fan, and but he's been kind of palling around and probably will have some access. I don't think he'll have access the way the people that we talked about will have access, but he might have some access. Um, but he's not in the government, and and he's a guy with a base, a large base. But it's I'm hopeful and I'm skeptical that he'll have any kind of outsized influence because there's enough things that the Tucker Carlson wing of the party can agree on with Trump. They can agree on a very aggressive actions against immigration. I mean, they have plenty of things to work on together. They can work on crime together. They can work on on tax reform together. They can work on there's a whole bunch of things that would fit within a kind of Tucker Carlson isolationist America First party that doesn't require touching Israel. And so nobody gets everything they want, and I'm look I'm the way I'm seeing it, and again, I'm not inside the government. I don't speak for anybody, but the way I'm seeing it is, there's certainly more isolationist rumblings now than there were 8 years ago, but they seem to all be landing in Russia, Ukraine, and not in Israel, because I think everybody understands that the Israel battle is really purely good versus evil, an ally of America. Again, I mean, you can make the same case for Russia, but it's not as well articulated. I think in Israel, I think it's better. So again, I'm not involved, and but I think that those who want to pursue isolationism have plenty of places to pursue it without touching the Israel file.
Elliot, you were one of the people that was helping to advising and then helping to implement the maximum pressure campaign that the Trump administration deployed against Iran in its first term. I think that the fear, the concern of the those who notice that President Trump's coalition contains so many isolationist pressures would be that the adoption of some kind of deal, some kind of new conception of a JCPOA-like instrument could be reinterpreted and become an aspect or expression of Trump's foreign policy. Is that something that we should be concerned about? Is that something you're concerned about?
I am. The maximum pressure campaign, I think, in the president's mind, was not to bring regime change to Iran. The purpose of it was to get to a negotiation that would produce some kind of deal that was much better than Obama's JCPOA, which the president thought, we all thought, was a terrible deal. Okay, fast forward now. If I were in Iran, I know exactly what I would do. I would say to the Americans, I'd say to the president, let's have that negotiation, and we'll have an agreement, and you'll see it will end the Iranian nuclear program, and you'll get a Nobel Peace Prize. That's the come on. The alternative at the end of the other road is a military strike, either by Israel or by us, against the nuclear weapons program in Iran. And I think it's fair to say that's not what the president wants. And as he talks about all these things, what he says is he doesn't want more violence and more wars. So what worries me is this trap that Iran is setting that will get us into a negotiation. Now, I think the first thing the president ought to do is reimpose maximum pressure right off. I mean, I'm sorry he didn't do it today on day one. That is, all the sanctions go back in place. I think he should also make it clear that he wants the Europeans who have the right to do this, Germany, UK, France, to do what's called snapback. That is to return automatically to the UN sanctions. Then, if the Iranians want to negotiate something, you ask for proof up front, like, yeah, stop enriching uranium, stop moving forward with your program. So I don't think the president is thinking of this primarily in military terms. And that could be a problem because the Iranians in these years, the Biden years, have moved a lot closer to having a nuclear weapon. They're now enriching to 60%. They've occasionally gone over that. They've got enough enriched uranium now for 5, 6 nuclear weapons. So I hope that he returns to a very tough position on Iran. And I hope and believe that if we reach the point at which the prime minister of Israel, whoever it is, says to him, we need to act, he'll be supportive of that. I think one of the debates, and I'll stop with this, one of the debates in the administration is going to be, what does a military strike mean? The president ordered the killing of Soleimani because that was a strike. And when it was over, it was over. And I think that that is true of an American military strike on the Iranian nuclear weapons program. Others will argue this is a war. This is like Iraq. You're going to be in it for your whole term. It'll destroy all of your other desires for your presidency. I can see that debate very much taking place inside the administration if we get to the point where a strike really has to be contemplated in short order.
I mean, the entire structure of President Trump's thinking about America and the Middle East, I think, is colored as a reaction to how he understood the Iraq War and America's experience in the Iraq War. And so imposing that onto the Iran question would really change the way that he thinks about it. It would shade the way that he thinks about it.
Look, I think he's going to try very hard to avoid attacking Iran. I just, it's just obvious he's not of a mind to start that type of a conflict. At the same time, he's very, very sensitive and cognizant of the risk of a nuclear Iran. I think he would candidly consider that probably the greatest threat facing the world right now. Not going to let it happen. Since we were all together, since the last time we were together in the Oval Office, Israel has now demonstrated that Iran is weak. They are attackable. Israel destroyed all their air defense systems. Israel's proven that it can go in there and do whatever it wants, whenever it wants. And I think obviously the United States could do the same thing. So I think 8 years ago we all gave advice to the president: don't talk to Khamenei, don't talk to him. Don't give him the dignity of meeting with the president of the United States. He's a bad guy, and just impose massive sanctions. This time around, it's clear to me you can't tell him who to meet with. I mean, he doesn't view that. He doesn't think that not meeting with someone is ever a good idea if you can take their measure and talk to them and see where I think this is going to happen. I think maximum sanctions will be reinstated. I think Trump's going to. I don't think it's more than a week away. I think the sanctions will be reimposed. So you'll have a future of a financially decimated Iran with a leader who's probably on his last few months, with an economy an economy in shatters, and a military that has proven it can't defend itself. Under those circumstances, Trump will say, "Hey, look, I can wipe you out anytime I want. If you can prove to me that you're not going to develop a nuclear weapon, we can do something." And but I'm not going to say hands off the military bases, so you can go hide nukes over there. And I'm not going to let the IAEC be in charge. You have to convince me, not some bureaucrat that I don't trust. And if he can do that, he'll do it. And frankly, if he can do that, I think we're all better off. So I think that's going to be his first shot. But I actually think that America will partner with Israel jointly in attacking the nuclear sites. If that doesn't get done in the next 6 months, I would bet that there will be a joint attack.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's turn to your questions now. You can ask a question by typing it into the Q&A function in the bottom right-hand corner of your Zoom screen. There's quite a few questions already. Gentlemen, this is the first one. Given that Russia is an ally and patron of Iran, do you think Trump's desire to broker an end to the war in Ukraine will have an effect on his policy in the Middle East?
Who should go
David?
first? Yeah, look, I don't think the answer is it depends. It really depends on how that gets resolved. I mean, let's assume that, just make this up. Trump comes in, sits with Zelensky and Putin, and he shows up with a map and one of his Sharpies, and he takes the pen out and he says, "Look, this is what it's going to be." And I'm giving Putin back give him some land, but those people speak Russian anyway, and they never really liked you, Zelensky. So, and you get the rest, and that's it. And we're not going to make Ukraine part of NATO, but we'll help you guys a little bit. And let's say that all happens. I'm not sure where that leads to the Middle East, other than it'll just give Trump a head of steam, thinking he can solve every problem in the world, and he'll probably try to do this as well. But I don't see how there's a direct impact, a direct fallout. I mean, Iraq and no part of the deal with Russia is going to require Russia to abandon Iran. I wish it did, but I don't think that's going to be part of the give and take.
Elliot, will Israel ever cede control of the Philadelphia corridor? Should it?
When it got out of Gaza, that was the very last decision, 2005, that Sharon made. Should it get out of that of the border area, which in the end he decided was impossible militarily to hold. Somebody's got to hold it, and it can't be Hamas. So the question really is, can there be a substitute? Some force, border force, some way of physically protecting that border? If the answer is not really, then they are going to have to stay at least on the edge of it and be willing to go in day after day to prevent smuggling. Because if we're worried about Hamas rebuilding, where's it going to get the missiles that it would then shoot into Israel? It's going to get them from the Sinai. They'll be smuggled by Iran. So if your main concern is preventing Hamas from ever doing October 7th again, from rebuilding its force, then Israel's got to either have control itself or be absolutely confident in the people controlling it.
I agree.
There's a couple of questions here about Qatar, the extent to which they're honest brokers, if you can dimension some influence that they may have in the American government to the Trump administration, why Special Envoy Witkoff was so effusive in his praise of the people who've sheltered Hamas for so many years.
Look, I actually think that was a rookie error. It was a mistake. I mean, when you have financial ties to Qatar, and you're in the middle of a negotiation, and Qatar has proven itself to not be a friend, certainly not be a friend of Israel, and you say what a great job they're doing, it just makes everybody feel like it's not a level playing field and Israel's not being well served. I don't think he meant much by it. I just think it was kind of again, it's not like he's got years of experience. I made a lot of mistakes. I made increasingly fewer mistakes as I went along, and I think that was kind of a rookie error. Listen, Qatar has managed to use its vast wealth to insinuate itself into, so many different corners of American policy, American academics, American science. I mean, they're everywhere. They're everywhere. And the question that the administration has to make is: are they a friend? Are they a foe? Are they a frenemy? Or how do they control this? Can they influence them? People have told me that they've been helpful. in trying to negotiate the hostages. And of course, my response is, well, they're probably more helpful if we threaten to move our airbase over to Riyadh out of Doha. That probably would be a good thing to say. But then I say, no, they're everywhere, and you got to kind of. So the answer, Jonathan, is I don't know, because I haven't been in the room. I've never been to Qatar. I don't know anybody there. I just know the same stuff you know. Maybe Elliott knows this better, but I just don't know enough.
I think it's a very pernicious influence. I think they're trying to use billions of dollars to buy influence in the United States with great success. Lobbyists, think tanks, universities, as you said, the money's all over the place. It's a Muslim Brotherhood supporting government. It supports people who hate us. And Al Jazeera, which is their station, teaches people to hate the United States. In the Iraq War, it taught people to kill Americans. If you look at the polls now that show that Arabs have no idea what Hamas did on October 7th, they don't know about the brutality, the animalistic behavior. Why not? Because Al Jazeera won't broadcast it. So I think we've been taking a lot from Qatar over the years. And when I suggested during the Bush years, this is 20 years ago, why don't we do a study of moving the air base, Al Udeid, out of Qatar? No, Pentagon didn't want to do it. Too important. I think that's where Congress should begin, or the administration should begin. And I have to say also, from a military point of view, that air base is too close to Iran to be safe if we ever have any kind of exchange with Iran. Much better off moving it a couple of hundred miles into Saudi Arabia, where it would be, if you look at the map, not only further from Iran, but closer to Asia. So I think the Qataris have us, there are practically no Qataris. It's just bizarre what a tiny population that is, but with endless amounts of money. And they've bought tons of influence here. It's something we ought to be, frankly, ashamed of.
And they bought it on both sides. They've been an equal opportunity briber.
It's true.
There's a question here about what this deal means in terms of the future threats against Israeli civilians. That precisely by incentivizing the capture of hostages, incentivizing the capture of hostages by releasing such a disproportionate, asymmetrical number of convicted terrorists for each civilian hostage, that it kind of gives a play. It sets up the strategy for success for future enemies and adversaries of Israel.
Well, look, I think that it's a great question, and of course, it's the fundamental question whenever you make one of these lopsided deals. Look, I'll argue the obvious, which is number one, I don't think Hamas needs an incentive to take hostages. If there was not a single Israeli being held right now by Hamas, they would still take hostages. It's just a good strategy, and they're always going to have that strategy. And whether we make a deal or don't make a deal, I think you're attributing too much, rationale to Hamas. I don't think they really care all that much about most of the people that they have in prison. It's maybe the way that they can maintain popular support, but they'll take hostages with or without this deal. And so I don't think it's that. The second thing is, nobody, they're celebrating and shooting off their guns and giving out candies and everything. But at the end of the day, there's not a single person in Gaza who actually is there right now looking at it and said, "Wow, we did great. What a great move." I mean, they got clobbered. They got decimated. It's a parking lot. Nobody's going to look at this transaction, at this war in its totality, and say that Hamas somehow should do this again in 5 years. I mean, if by some miracle Gaza gets rebuilt and everybody goes back to their corners, nobody in 5 years is going to say, "Let's go do an October 7th again. It worked out so well the first time." So I just don't think that that's all that serious. And look, I would add one thing, which is to me something which I factor in, which is the mitzvah pidyon shvuyim, of redeeming captives, which to me is a very, very interesting mitzvah. I mean, it's considered to be, such a paramount commandment that it supersedes, feeding the hungry and, providing medicine to the sick. I mean, it beats all other charitable endeavors. And then people say, yeah, but you can't do it in a way which incentivizes kidnappers. And my response is, wait a minute. Anytime you give any consideration to a kidnapper in exchange for releasing a hostage, you're providing an incentive. I challenge everybody, give me a fact pattern where you actually give anything to the kidnapper. It's enough to cause him to release the hostage, and then you haven't then incentivized him to do it all over again. So
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time kind of wrestling with this. I spoke to a lot of rabbis. At the end of the day, I take some comfort in the views of the Haredi parties, because the Haredi parties, whatever you think of them, care very much about not participating in causing Israel to violate halachic law. And Aryeh Deri, who's sort of the guy I know the best, and who's, whatever you think of him, again, he's a very, very accomplished Torah scholar. He said this completely satisfies the commandment of redeeming the captives. So very, very difficult situation. I just don't think incrementally it provides that much. And by the way, just one last point, there's probably 20,000 terrorists out there around the world, right now. There, I mean, we got them in America, we got them all throughout the Arab world, we got plenty of them in Judea and Samaria, we got tons of them in. There's so many. So releasing another 250 is very painful. I mean, one of them that's getting released is the killer of my friend Ari Fuld. I mean, this is a friend of mine. They're going to release his killer. The family's going, understandably, is very upset about that. But at the end of the day, leaving aside all the emotions, is Israel that much more, at peril because 250 more terrorists are out there compared to the 10,000 that are already out there? I think Israel is not going to permit another October 7th. I think this, unfortunately, was a terrible lesson, but it was a lesson learned. And again, I hate the deal, but I support it.
I would only add to that we do it too. We don't pay money to terrorist groups or governments, but we make trades. We did such a trade in the last year with Venezuela. They took some American hostages, so we gave them back a very high-ranking official they wanted out of federal prison. We do it with Russia. We do it with China. So everybody in the end does it. I think what's missing here is that we all know this is happening. Why can't the democracies of the world who are the victims of this come together and say, okay, we're going to start punishing it? Trade sanctions, economic sanctions, financial sanctions, whatever. But it's not only that people get rewarded for the individual hostage they take, it's that they never get punished. It's pure profit before, during, and after. And that's what we ought to try to change.
Yeah, I would also add one more thing, Elliot, which I've been pushing the last few days, which is Israel needs to have a death penalty for terrorists. I mean, a lot of Israelis don't want to do that. A lot of Israelis think they're above the death penalty. But when terrorists die, then there's no longer an incentive. You can't trade them anymore. And I think that will create the strongest disincentive to kidnap people, to trade them for terrorists, because once they're dead, there's nothing to trade for.
In terms of imposing a penalty, Elliot, I want to go back to something that Ambassador Friedman said in the beginning, which is that in his conversations with Palestinians, frank conversations, off-the-record conversations with Palestinians, he's learned about two contrasting sets of motivations. Some are material. We have to build highways and collect garbage, and we want to build a state. But the other sort of motivation is rooted in what you called honor, Ambassador Friedman. And just as Elliot has a sensible idea about imposing financial sanctions that could be a disincentive to hostage taking, how can one address that deeper, more fundamental concern that's somewhat alien to us as Americans, but has such a great purchase in the imagination in the Muslim world? Honor.
Well, look, you have almost 2 million Arab citizens of Israel. They care very, very much about being Israelis, right? So it's not like there's this, and they're effectively, Palestinians, just like the Palestinians living elsewhere. I remember when I was working on a peace plan, I went up to al-Fahim up in the north, which is a 100% Arab city. They don't particularly like Israel very much. I went there, I met with the mayor, and I said, "Hey, look, President Trump's very, out of the box kind of guy. You like your Palestinian brethren so much. What if we redraw the map and you'll, instead of being inside of Israel, you're right on the border anyway. We'll just make a little line. And now, if there's a Palestinian state, you can be with your Palestinian brethren." He looked at me like I had two heads. He said, "Are you out of your mind?" He said, "We never want to be part of a Palestinian state. We hate Israel, but we don't hate it that much. Like, we don't hate it enough to leave it." And that's the truth. That's the truth. So you have to understand what we're doing. It's the Middle East. Everything, everything that's said is nuanced and complicated. But at the end of the day, Israel has succeeded in de-radicalizing, or put it this way, giving the Israeli Arabs something more important than honor, which is treat them with respect, give them a good pathway to a good way of life, educate them, let them participate in society as lawyers and doctors and pharmacists. That actually works. And so I think that has to be the pathway for the Palestinians in the West Bank as well.
Elliott,
Yeah, I think I agree with most of that, but I just push it a little further east.
Elliott, some 250 Palestinian prisoners are going to be released. So here's another question from our audience. Where are they being released to?
It varies. Some are going to be exiled, and some are going back to Gaza. And that, I think some of that has to be negotiated as they are released, case by case. There are also prisoners that Hamas wanted that Israel simply refuses to release, but it's you then have to find, of course, you'd say it's easy to say exile, but who's going to take them? So it's a mix. Mostly, I think, mostly going to Gaza.
And presumably Israel has some strategy for surveilling and keeping track of these people.
Well, one thing that Israel should try to do better. It's clear that Israel has had fantastic intel about Hezbollah, right? Totally wired. We found that out. They didn't have Hamas wired that way. The situations are not, the same. Lebanon, separate country. But if you can wire Hezbollah that way, maybe they can do a better job in the future of wiring Gaza and having the intelligence that they obviously lacked this time around.
There was a complete lack of respect within the army for the threats that Gaza, represented. I mean, they saw in Hezbollah, 150,000 precision guided missiles that could take down almost any building in Israel, and they saw in Hamas, a primitive bunch of angry people that would flare up every few years with primitive rockets. You bring in some Qatari money, you spread around the cash, they go back to sleep for a couple of years, and then come back. It was just mowing the lawn, and then and that proved to be a huge intelligence mistake by the IDF. Huge mistake. And hopefully that won't. And I agree with you though that this time around, and since the IDF has been everywhere inside the Gaza Strip, hopefully there's a lot more intelligence gathering capabilities now than there were before.
Okay, gentlemen, final thoughts. Elliott?
If you stand back a bit and talk not just about Gaza, but about Israel's situation in the Middle East, it's much better than it could possibly have seemed on October 7th of 2023. What Israel did to Hezbollah, it changes the whole region. Israel's attacks on Iran changes the whole region. The clarity with which they showed that they could hit whatever they want to hit in Iran, the fall of Assad. So there really is a moment of opportunity here. I think, and I hope that our government, President Trump, will think about taking it to do something he started, which is to build that Israel-Arab-U.S. alliance against Iran and for peace in the region. He did it under much worse circumstances um, 5, 6, 7 years ago. There's a real opportunity to go forward with it now, and I hope we do it.
Ambassador Friedman?
Well, I agree with Elliot. I think Israel is stronger now than I think it's ever been. I think we're approaching a point where their security profile is really, I think kudos to them, because they got very little help from anybody else. But kudos to them, they've humiliated Iran, they've sanitized Syria, they've decapitated Hezbollah, and they've mostly defeated Hamas. I mean, it's almost like like Al Pacino and saying, today we took care of all family business. I mean, they really have done an excellent job. Now the question is, what do they do now? I think the Trump policy, if it goes where I suspect it's going to go, is going to be largely, you guys don't seem to need us all that much. Fight your wars, kill your terrorists. We'll give you the weapons that you need, and we'll wish you luck. Don't ask us to put any of our people in harm's way, but you're doing a great job. Iran will be the place where maybe they can come together. Then you got the question of the Abraham Accords and what happens with Saudi Arabia. And there you'll see that's where I think there'll be some different opinions, because some people will be in, I think, real deal heat for Saudi, like want to get him in. And by the way, people in Israel too. I don't just blaming Americans. There'll be some real deal heat to get Saudi on board, and there's a huge amount of benefits to getting Saudi on board. I'm not minimizing it. The question is talking Saudi out of the mistake that they will make by saying we need to see a pathway to a Palestinian state. I think that's a huge mistake. Now, so some people will be able to convince the Saudis that that's not what they really want, and some won't care because it's not high on their list of, they want to get the win. It'll be interesting. There's so many people, with their finger in this pot, that you'll have a lot of different points of view. It's probably a year away or so until things have to quiet down a little bit more. But that's where, again, normalizing the Saudis is a great outcome for Israel, great outcome for America, good for the world, but not at any price. And we'll see how that gets priced.
Gentlemen, thank you for this briefing. Ladies and gentlemen, with that, we adjourn.